At the edge of an ordinary pond, the surface looks still. Nothing moves in a way that demands attention. No obvious threat, no sign that anything here is worth a second look. But something beneath that surface is already in position. It has been waiting, motionless, invisible, patient, in a way that has no urgency, because it has never needed urgency. This predator was here before the first dinosaur took a single step. Its lineage stretches back over 300 million years, through every mass extinction this planet has ever produced, including the one that came closest to ending all life entirely. It survived all of them, and it did so without fundamentally changing what it is. Most predators fail more than they succeed. Lions, sharks, wolves, even the best hunters on Earth miss the majority of their attempts. That is simply the reality of chasing, overpowering, and competing for prey. This one succeeds in roughly 95 out of every 100 attempts, not by being faster, not by being stronger, not by chasing anything at all. When it strikes, the entire action is over in less time than it takes your brain to register that something has moved. There is no warning, no visible preparation, no recovery attempt needed, because it almost never misses, and most people walk past it every single day without knowing it is there. Because the form that makes all of this possible is not the one people recognize. It spends the majority of its life in a stage that looks like nothing, a small, still shape resting at the bottom of a ditch, a pond, a slow-moving stretch of water, near a road or a park. No wings, nothing that hints at what it is capable of, just stillness, and yet everything about it, every part of its biology, every stage of its life, is built around that one perfect action. Today, we get into what this animal actually is, how it does what it does, and why something this extraordinary has managed to remain almost completely invisible to the people living alongside it. Before we begin, if you enjoy content like this, hit the like button and subscribe, and let me know in the comments. Is it late where you are right now, or are you starting your day with this? Now let's begin. Long before familiar shapes of land and sky settled into their present arrangement, the air itself carried a different weight, dense with oxygen in a way that altered what life could become. Around 325 million years ago, during the Carboniferous period, the atmosphere held roughly 35% oxygen, far above the 21% that surrounds the planet today. That single difference expanded the limits of biology, allowing bodies to grow beyond scales now considered impossible. Insects, unlike vertebrates, do not rely on lungs to move oxygen through their bodies. Instead, they breathe through branching networks of tubes called tracheae, which deliver oxygen directly to tissues. In an environment rich with oxygen, these tubes could extend farther without losing efficiency, supporting larger and more demanding forms. The result was a world where insects did not remain small or hidden. They expanded, filling ecological roles that would later belong to entirely different groups of animals. Among them moved a presence that would have dominated the air with quiet authority. Meganeura, a distant relative of modern dragonflies, stretched its wings to nearly 70 centimeters across. It flew through skies that held no birds, no bats, no vertebrate life capable of sustained flight. There was nothing above it, nothing competing for that space. The air belonged to insects, and Meganeura moved through it with a scale that today feels almost unreal. Below, the land did not resemble anything familiar. There were no grasses softening the ground, no flowers shaping ecosystems with color and scent. Instead, vast coal swamps spread across continents, dense with towering fern trees and thick vegetation that rose straight from waterlogged soil. The ground was often submerged. The boundaries between land and water blurred into slow, humid expanses. Light filtered through heavy canopies, diffused and muted, creating a world where visibility was limited and movement was often concealed. Within these waters, life followed a different rhythm. Beneath the surface of still pools and quiet channels, small predators already occupied the spaces that would persist for hundreds of millions of years. Their forms were not identical to those seen today, but their function, their role, and the underlying structure of their existence had already taken shape. They hunted in silence, relying on designs that required little change to remain effective across shifting conditions. This introduces a principle that quietly shapes the rest of the story. Evolution does not always push toward constant transformation. Sometimes it arrives at a form so well suited to its environment that change offers no advantage. Variation still occurs, generation after generation, but the core structure remains untouched because nothing surpasses it in function. This is evolutionary stasis, a state where success becomes stability, and stability persists across immense spans of time. In the waters of the Carboniferous, that stability had already begun to take hold. While the world above shifted through unfamiliar forms and expanding scales, something below had settled into a design that required no reinvention. It would pass through ages of upheaval, through shifting continents and collapsing ecosystems, carrying that same solution forward without needing to become anything else. To understand why that design endures, attention must move away from the sky and into the quieter space beneath the surface, where the defining form of this animal exists for most of its life, unnoticed and unchanged. What people recognize exists only at the surface of the story, a brief and luminous phase that arrives at the very end. The form most often seen, wings catching light, and air, occupies only a small fraction of the animal's life, as little as 5%. The remaining time unfolds elsewhere, below the visible layer, in a state that rarely enters awareness. For the greater portion of its existence, the dragonfly lives as a nymph. It remains fully aquatic, settled within the quiet depths of ponds, streams, and still channels where movement slows and sound becomes muted. In this form, it bears no resemblance to the aerial insect it will eventually become. The connection between the two is not obvious, even when held side by side. The body is compact and grounded, shaped for stability rather than motion across distance. 6 legs extend outward, used not for wandering, but for maintaining position against surfaces that shift gently with currents. Its coloration blends with its surroundings, muted tones of brown or olive that mirror sediment, plant matter, and shadow. Size varies with age and species, often no larger than a thumbnail, sometimes closer to the narrow width of a fingernail. Nothing about its appearance draws attention. It exists without display. The eyes, however, occupy a different scale. They are large in proportion to the rest of the body, quietly dominating the head. Their presence suggests awareness beyond what the rest of the form reveals. Yet even this detail offers no clear signal of what the animal is capable of. There are no wings, no indication of future transformation, no visible trace of the adult stage waiting ahead. Time passes slowly in this state. Depending on species and climate, a nymph may remain underwater for 1 to 6 years. In colder regions, development extends further, shaped by temperature that slows internal processes and stretches growth across long intervals. During this period, the body does not expand continuously. It grows in stages, each marked by molting. Molting is a complete renewal. The outer exoskeleton splits, and the animal withdraws from it, emerging slightly larger, the new surface soft before it hardens again. This process repeats many times, up to 17 cycles in some species, each one a precise adjustment in size and structure. The discarded forms remain behind, empty impressions of earlier stages, gradually settling into the surrounding environment. Breathing occurs in a manner that remains hidden from view. Water is drawn into a chamber within the body, where internal gill structures extract dissolved oxygen. The water is then expelled, and the cycle continues, steady and continuous. This system does more than sustain respiration. The same chamber can contract with force, pushing water outward in a sudden release that propels the nymph through its environment. Movement appears brief and controlled, a short burst that carries it away from disturbance. Between these moments of motion, the body returns to stillness. There is no clear boundary between activity and rest. The nymph does not enter a state comparable to sleep. Its awareness persists, aligned with subtle changes in its surroundings, responding to movement, to shifts in light, to the presence of nearby life. This quiet persistence defines its existence. It does not roam widely or expend energy without purpose. It remains positioned within its environment, present in each moment as it unfolds, its behavior shaped by a balance between motion and stillness that requires no excess. Within that stillness, a system is prepared, concealed within the structure of the body, held in readiness. Its function remains unseen until the precise instant it is required, when a brief movement transforms the calm into action, with a speed that seems out of proportion to the form that contains it. Beneath the calm surface of the body, there is a structure that remains hidden even at close range, folded so tightly into place that it leaves no visible trace. The face of the nymph appears simple, unremarkable, offering nothing that suggests the presence of an additional mechanism waiting just below it. No outline, no movement, no tension held in readiness, only stillness. This structure is the labium, a secondary jaw unlike anything expected in an organism of this size. When inactive, it rests compressed beneath the head, layered and compact, part of the body's quiet geometry. It does not shift or flex in anticipation. It exists without announcing itself, integrated so completely that it escapes notice entirely. Then, in a moment defined not by buildup, but by sudden release, it extends. The movement occurs in approximately 25 milliseconds. Within that brief interval, the labium unfolds and projects outward, reaching a distance equal to 1/3 of the nymph's entire body length. The transition from concealment to full extension happens faster than the eye can follow, a motion that exists more as an outcome than an observable process. Scaled to human proportions, the distance becomes difficult to hold in mind. A structure beginning at the chin would extend beyond the knees in a single uninterrupted action, emerging from stillness without visible preparation. The speed of that extension compresses space and time together, leaving no room for interruption or adjustment. The force behind this motion does not come from muscle alone. Instead, it relies on a rapid change in internal pressure, a hydraulic system driven by hemolymph moving through the body. This fluid, serving a role similar to blood, is redirected and compressed in a controlled surge. The resulting pressure acts upon the folded structure, driving it outward with a force that muscle fibers alone could not achieve at such speed. At the tip of the labium are two articulated palps, shaped for capture. They open slightly during extension, then close upon contact, forming a secure hold around the target. The edges are lined with fine serrations, subtle but effective, ensuring that once contact is made, release does not occur. The motion of closing is as immediate as the extension itself, completing the action in a single continuous sequence. What surrounds this movement remains undisturbed. There is no preliminary signal carried through the water, no ripple that announces the strike in advance. The environment retains its quiet until the instant of contact, and by then the action is already complete. The prey is enclosed before any response can form. This mechanism is not a recent development. Fossil evidence preserves its structure with remarkable clarity, showing that forms from approximately 250 million years ago possess the same essential design. The proportions, the articulation, the underlying system of extension remain consistent across vast spans of time. What operates in present waters follows the same principles established long before many familiar lineages appeared. Within its reach fall a range of organisms that share the same environment. Small aquatic larvae drift through the water column. Minute crustaceans move in short, irregular paths. Tadpoles and juvenile fish pass through the same spaces, each navigating its own pattern of movement. When any of these cross into the precise range required, they become subject to the same rapid sequence, drawn inward before the surrounding water has time to register change. The labium does not move randomly. It remains folded until a specific alignment occurs, a moment where position and distance converge within narrow limits. The stillness that precedes each strike is not empty. It holds a quiet calculation, a readiness shaped by exact placement, where the unfolding of the structure meets the movement of another life at a single precise point in space. There is a moment before each strike where nothing appears to change, yet within that stillness, a calculation unfolds. The nymph does not respond to where another organism is positioned in the present. Instead, it aligns itself with where that organism will arrive, shaping its action around a point that does not yet exist. This requires an internal process that unfolds continuously. The movement of nearby life is not observed as a simple path, but as a set of shifting variables, each influencing the final outcome. Speed, direction, and distance are held together within a brief interval, along with the time required for the extending structure to complete its motion. These elements combine into a quiet prediction, one that resolves itself in a single release. The brain that performs this work is small, containing fewer than 1 million neurons. In comparison, a honeybee carries a similar number, while the human brain holds approximately 86 billion. Despite this difference in scale, the nymph processes its environment with a precision that allows it to act not on what is visible, but on what is about to occur. Its compound eyes form a wide field of awareness, extending in nearly all directions. Even at this stage of life, the visual system remains highly sensitive, capable of detecting slight movements in conditions where light is limited. Shapes do not need to be fully defined. Motion alone is sufficient, a subtle shift against the surrounding background, becoming a signal that enters the nymph's internal calculations. Near the boundary between water and air, perception becomes more complex. Light bends as it passes between these two environments, shifting the apparent position of objects. A small organism near the surface appears displaced from its actual location, an effect that could mislead a simpler visual system. The nymph compensates for this without interruption, adjusting its aim to account for the distortion, aligning its action with the true position rather than the visible one. Its own position is not fixed within this process. If the nymph has shifted slightly since first registering a target, that movement is incorporated into the calculation. The relationship between itself and the moving organism is updated continuously, each adjustment refining the point where the strike will meet its mark. The outcome of this process appears as consistency. The nymph achieves a success rate of approximately 95%, a level of effectiveness reached without pursuit or extended movement. Energy is conserved through stillness, expended only in the brief instant of action. There is no sequence of attempts, no visible correction following failure. Each strike carries the weight of a completed calculation. In contrast, other predators rely on extended effort. A cheetah, for example, engages in a burst of speed that can last up to 30 seconds, consuming significant energy in a single attempt. Even with this investment, success occurs in just over half of its pursuits, and recovery becomes necessary before the next effort can begin. The nymph operates within a different framework, one where efficiency replaces exertion and accuracy reduces the need for repetition. This method of hunting depends on a system that resolves movement into prediction, translating observation into a future position with quiet precision. The body remains still, but within that stillness, information flows and converges, guiding a single motion that unfolds too quickly to be followed in real time. Light does not arrive as a single, simple signal. It carries layers, directions, and subtle variations that pass unnoticed through most eyes, dissolving into a narrow band of perception. Within the dragonfly, those layers remain intact, received and separated into a spectrum far richer than the one familiar to human experience. Across its compound eyes, thousands of individual units gather information simultaneously, each contributing a fragment of the surrounding world. Within these units lie up to 30 distinct types of photoreceptors, each tuned to a different range of wavelengths. By comparison, human vision relies on four, three for color and one for brightness. The difference is not only numerical, it reshapes how reality is assembled, allowing the dragonfly to perceive contrasts and signals that do not exist within the limits of human sight. Among these signals are ultraviolet light and polarized light. Ultraviolet reveals patterns and reflections invisible to most animals, while polarized light carries directional information, its waves aligned along a single plane. Water reflects this form of light strongly, creating a signature that can be detected even from significant height and at angles that appear featureless to human observers. Through this sensitivity, the dragonfly identifies surfaces, boundaries, and pathways that remain hidden within ordinary vision. Time itself is also experienced differently. The rate at which visual information is processed, known as flicker fusion rate, reaches approximately 300 frames per second. Human perception blends motion into continuity at around 60. Within the dragonfly's awareness, movement unfolds in finer increments, each moment divided into smaller, more precise segments. Actions that appear swift to human eyes extend into sequences that can be examined and navigated. In practical terms, this alters the relationship between predator and disturbance. A hand moving through the air, intended to intercept or strike, progresses slowly within this expanded frame of perception. The dragonfly receives multiple stages of that motion, each one offering an opportunity to adjust position before contact becomes possible. What appears instantaneous from one perspective becomes a series of manageable intervals from another. Within this system, specialized neurons refine the flow of information. Known as small target motion detectors, these cells respond exclusively to the movement of small objects against complex backgrounds. Their activity is selective, ignoring broad shifts such as swaying vegetation or shifting light patterns, focusing instead on discrete motion that matches the scale of potential prey. This filtering process allows the dragonfly to isolate a single moving form, even when surrounded by continuous environmental change. A small insect passing through a layered background becomes a clear signal within this system. The surrounding motion fades into irrelevance, leaving only the path of the target defined with precision. This clarity supports the accuracy observed in its hunting behavior, linking perception directly to action without unnecessary interference. The allocation of neural resources reflects the importance of this system. In the adult dragonfly, approximately 80% of the brain's processing capacity is dedicated to vision. This proportion exceeds that of any other known animal, emphasizing the central role of sight in its interaction with the world. Other functions continue, but they operate alongside a visual system that dominates nearly all incoming information. Through this arrangement, the dragonfly experiences an environment structured by detail, motion, and layered signals that extend beyond human awareness. Its perception integrates color, direction, and time into a continuous stream, allowing it to navigate and respond with a precision that emerges naturally from the way it sees. Air, once entered, becomes a medium shaped by motion rather than resistance. Within it, the adult dragonfly does not simply move forward in a straight path. It navigates through layered currents, adjusting position with a precision that reflects a deep integration of structure and control. The body carries 4 wings, arranged in 2 pairs, each one capable of operating independently from the others. On every wing beat, these surfaces can shift in angle, timing, and direction, forming patterns that adapt continuously to the surrounding air. This independence allows combinations of movement that do not exist in other flying animals, where wings tend to act in coordinated pairs or unified strokes. Through this system, the dragonfly maintains a position in space without drift. It hovers in place, holding steady against shifting air, neither rising nor falling unless it chooses to do so. It can move backward while maintaining speed, reversing direction without reorienting its body. Turns occur without the gradual loss of velocity seen in most flight, the path curving smoothly while momentum remains intact. Speed itself extends across a wide range. Sustained flight reaches approximately 55 kilometers per hour, while brief bursts can exceed 90 in certain species. These values emerge not from a single mode of movement, but from a flexible system that adjusts wing motion to match the demands of each moment, whether stability or rapid traversal. The surface of each wing reveals a texture that appears irregular at first glance. Instead of a smooth plane, it carries a series of ridges and shallow valleys, a corrugated structure that alters how air moves across it. These features guide the formation of small vortices, pockets of circulating air that remain stable along the wing's surface. The presence of these vortices enhances lift, particularly at lower speeds, allowing the dragonfly to remain aloft with minimal energy while hovering or moving slowly. As the wings move, they do not simply push against the air, they shape it, creating patterns of flow that support and stabilize the body. Each adjustment in angle or timing modifies these patterns, producing subtle changes in lift and thrust that translate into controlled motion. The result is a form of flight that responds instantly to shifts in direction or position, maintaining balance without visible effort. Observations of dragonflies in pursuit of prey reveal another layer of this system. Rather than following the path of a moving target, they align their trajectory with a point of interception. This point is not fixed but recalculated continuously as both predator and target move. The flight path becomes a direct line to where the target will arrive, reducing the need for correction and allowing the approach to remain efficient. Research conducted by teams at Harvard University and California Institute of Technology has focused on this mode of movement, examining how such precision can be achieved with limited energy. Their studies use dragonfly flight as a model for small aerial systems, particularly those designed to navigate complex environments where stability and adaptability are required. Modern engineering continues to explore these principles, yet the complete replication of this flight system remains out of reach. The coordination of four independently controlled wings, each responding to changing conditions in real time, presents a level of complexity that current designs have not fully matched. Within this form, the dragonfly moves through air as though it belongs entirely to it, its structure and motion aligned with the physics of the medium in a way that requires no excess. There comes a point when the long rhythm of the water no longer holds the body in place. The change is subtle at first, carried through shifts in temperature, the length of daylight, and the quiet pressure of the atmosphere above. These signals gather over time, aligning into a single transition that begins without announcement. The nymph stops feeding. Movement slows, not from inactivity, but from a redirection of purpose. It rises from the substrate and moves toward the surface, leaving behind the depth it has occupied for years. The path continues upward, beyond the boundary of the water, toward whatever vertical structure is available. A stem, a stone, the side of a wall, each becomes a passage leading out of one environment into another. This ascent usually occurs in darkness. Night offers a narrow margin of concealment, reducing visibility from above. The nymph grips the surface and holds still, its body anchored firmly in place. For a time, nothing appears to happen. The form remains unchanged, suspended between states. Then a line forms along the back of the thorax. The outer layer begins to separate, opening gradually along this seam. What has served as structure for years becomes a shell that no longer fits. From within it, a new form begins to emerge. The process unfolds slowly. The head appears first, followed by the thorax, then the abdomen. Each section is drawn free with measured effort, the emerging body soft and unformed compared to the rigid surface it leaves behind. This sequence can take anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours, shaped by surrounding temperature and conditions. During this interval, the dragonfly exists in a state of complete vulnerability. It cannot move with speed, cannot take flight, cannot retreat. The limbs are not yet strong. The surface of the body has not hardened, and the wings are still folded into compact, crumpled forms that hang close to the sides. Once free from the exoskeleton, the next phase begins. The dragonfly remains attached to the surface, while internal pressure pushes fluid through the network of veins within the wings. Gradually, they expand outward, lengthening and unfolding into their full shape. This process requires additional time, often between 30 minutes and an hour, during which the body continues to stabilize. Throughout this entire transition, stillness remains the only form of protection. The darkness of night provides partial cover, but it does not eliminate risk. Other creatures move through this same period, guided by their own patterns of activity. Spiders wade along surfaces. Nocturnal birds pass overhead. Small mammals and insects search along edges and structures. Many emerging dragonflies do not complete this process. The stage that transforms them also exposes them. From an initial group of eggs, only a small number will reach this point and move beyond it. The losses occur quietly, absorbed into the surrounding environment without visible trace. What remains after a successful emergence is a structure left behind, still attached to the surface where the transformation took place. This empty form, known as an exuvia, preserves every detail of the nymph's outer shape. It holds the memory of a life stage that has ended, a complete imprint without the presence that once filled it. These exuviae remain long after the dragonfly has departed, offering a record that can be read without disturbing the living animal. Through them, scientists identify species and observe populations, tracing the presence of life through the forms it leaves behind. Above this still shell, the newly formed dragonfly waits as its body completes its transition, its wings fully extended, its structure settling into strength. The long years within water have condensed into a single passage through darkness, a brief interval where everything depends on stillness and time aligning without interruption. Across open water, far from any shoreline, there are moments when small wings pass overhead, unnoticed against the brightness of the sky. They leave no trail, no shadow strong enough to hold attention, and for most of human history, their movement remained unrecorded. The species responsible for this passage is Pantala flavescens, often called the globe skimmer. Its presence spans continents, appearing in regions separated by thousands of kilometers. For many years, these appearances were treated as isolated events, each population considered separate, connected only by coincidence. The pattern only began to take shape when observations accumulated in a specific location. In the Maldives, far from large freshwater systems, large numbers of these dragonflies would arrive at the same time each year. The islands offered little suitable habitat for reproduction, yet the insects appeared in waves, moving through without remaining. Their arrival suggested a movement that extended beyond local dispersal. This observation drew the attention of Charles Anderson, who began tracing the timing and direction of these appearances. Over time, a broader pattern emerged, linking regions that had not previously been considered connected. Populations were moving between India, the Maldives, and East Africa, forming a route that crossed a vast stretch of ocean. The distance involved extends far beyond what was once thought possible for an insect of this size. A full migration cycle can cover between 14,000 and 18,000 kilometers. Within this journey lies a continuous crossing of the Indian Ocean, a stretch of approximately 3,500 kilometers without land. The dragonflies do not travel close to the surface during this passage. Instead, they ascend into higher layers of the atmosphere, entering wind systems that carry them across open water. These currents provide both direction and support, reducing the need for constant powered flight. The insects move within these flows, adjusting their position as needed, but largely allowing the movement of air to define their path. From the ground, this migration remains invisible. It occurs above cloud level, beyond the range of ordinary observation. The confirmation of this movement required a different form of evidence. Direct tracking was not possible across such distances, so researchers turned to chemical analysis. As nymphs develop in water, the chemical composition of that water leaves a signature within their tissues. In particular, the ratio of hydrogen isotopes becomes embedded in the structure of their wings. When adult dragonflies were collected in East Africa, analysis of their wings revealed isotope patterns that matched water sources in India. This connection provided physical evidence of movement between regions separated by ocean, confirming that these populations were not isolated but part of a continuous system. Through this process, the globe skimmer was recognized as a single global population, its members moving across continents in a repeating cycle. The migration had been occurring without interruption, unobserved in its entirety, existing outside the scale of human awareness. The movement itself does not follow a straight line, but shifts with seasonal changes in wind and rainfall, linking breeding sites across regions that experience different climatic conditions. The life cycle extends across these shifts, with each generation continuing the pattern established by the one before it. In this way, the dragonfly's presence is not confined to a single place, but distributed across a network of environments connected by air and time. The journey it undertakes spans distances that reshape the understanding of what small flying organisms can achieve, carried not only by their own motion, but by the larger systems that move around them. High above the surface, beyond ordinary sight, this passage continues, repeating across years without interruption, linking distant landscapes through a path that remains largely unseen. The record of life holds moments where continuity thins, where entire systems falter and recede, leaving only fragments to carry forward. One of these moments began around 375 million years ago, during what is now called the Late Devonian extinction. It did not arrive as a single event, but as a prolonged unraveling, unfolding across vast stretches of time. During this period, roughly 75% of all species disappeared. Marine ecosystems, which at the time held the majority of complex life, began to collapse in stages. The cause did not originate in the ocean itself, but on land, where the first rooted plants had begun to spread across exposed surfaces. These early plants developed structures capable of penetrating rock, breaking it apart, and releasing minerals into surrounding environments. Rain carried these nutrients into shallow seas, enriching waters that had previously remained stable in composition. The sudden increase in available nutrients fueled the rapid growth of algae, forming dense blooms that expanded across large regions. As these blooms grew, they altered the balance of the water. When the algae died, their decomposition consumed oxygen, gradually depleting it from the surrounding environment. Over time, this process created widespread anoxic conditions, regions of water where oxygen levels dropped too low to support most forms of marine life. These dead zones expanded, spreading across ocean floors and reshaping entire ecosystems. Within this changing environment, many organisms could not adapt quickly enough. Their survival depended on oxygen levels that no longer existed, and their decline became part of a broader pattern of loss that extended across continents and seas. Among the life forms present during this time were early aquatic insects, ancestors of the lineage that would later include the dragonfly. These organisms already possessed a respiratory system capable of extracting oxygen from water, drawing it through internal structures that functioned even when oxygen levels were low. This system, shaped by earlier conditions, became an advantage within the new environment. They had not developed this trait in response to the extinction. It existed beforehand, part of their basic structure, serving a function that became critical only when conditions changed. As oxygen levels dropped, this ability allowed them to persist in environments where other organisms could no longer survive. The distinction between adaptation and sufficiency becomes clear in this context. The survival of these insects did not depend on rapid change, but on the compatibility of their existing form with new conditions. What they already were aligned with what the environment had become, allowing continuity without transformation. This pattern influenced the pace at which populations recovered. Insects reproduce on shorter timescales than larger animals, with generation intervals often measured in 1 or 2 years. This allows for many cycles of reproduction within a relatively brief period, increasing the potential for populations to stabilize and expand following disruption. In contrast, larger vertebrates require longer periods to reach maturity and reproduce, slowing their recovery in the aftermath of environmental change. The difference in generational timing shapes how quickly each group can respond to shifting conditions, contributing to the persistence of some lineages while others decline. Through these combined factors, early members of the dragonfly lineage remained present as the Devonian world transformed. Their survival was not the result of a new strategy, but the continuation of an existing one, carried forward through conditions that removed many of the surrounding forms. The extinction did not erase life entirely, but it reshaped the structure of ecosystems, creating a new context in which only certain designs could continue. Within that context, these insects endured, maintaining a presence that would extend into the environments that followed. There was a period when the continuity of life narrowed to its thinnest margin, when entire branches of existence faded at once, leaving only a sparse remainder to carry forward. Around 252 million years ago, this contraction reached a scale unmatched before or since. It is known as the Permian-Triassic extinction, often called the Great Dying. The numbers that define it carry a quiet weight. Approximately 96% of marine species disappeared. On land, around 70% of vertebrate species followed. The loss was not confined to a single region or environment. It extended across the planet, affecting nearly every system that sustained complex life. The origin of this event lay within a region now referred to as the Siberian Traps, a vast volcanic formation covering close to 2 million square kilometers. Over the course of roughly 1 million years, this region released enormous quantities of gases into the atmosphere, including carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide. These emissions altered the chemical balance of both air and water in ways that unfolded gradually, but with irreversible effect. Global temperatures rose by approximately 10 degrees Celsius. This shift affected climate patterns, ocean circulation, and the stability of ecosystems that had developed under different conditions. As carbon dioxide dissolved into seawater, it changed the acidity of the oceans, lowering pH levels and making the water corrosive to calcium carbonate structures. Many marine organisms depended on these structures for survival, and their degradation removed the physical foundation of entire communities. At the same time, the protective layer of ozone in the upper atmosphere weakened, allowing increased ultraviolet radiation to reach the surface. This added a further layer of stress to organisms already affected by changes in temperature and chemistry. The world during this period did not change all at once. It shifted through stages, each compounding the effects of the last. Forests declined across continents, their structures unable to persist under altered climate conditions. Fires spread across large areas, leaving behind landscapes that no longer supported the same forms of life. The oceans, once stable, became environments where oxygen levels fluctuated and chemical conditions shifted beyond previous limits. Within this altered world, survival depended on finding environments where change occurred more slowly. Freshwater systems provided such spaces. Unlike the open ocean or the atmosphere, a pond or small body of water is a contained environment. Its boundaries limit the rate at which external changes influence internal conditions. Within these systems, the lineage that would lead to modern dragonflies continued. The surrounding conditions were far from stable, yet the pace of change within these smaller environments allowed for persistence. Temperature shifts occurred more gradually, and chemical alterations were buffered by the contained nature of the water. This difference in scale became significant during the most severe phases of the extinction. While larger systems experienced rapid and widespread transformation, smaller freshwater habitats retained a degree of continuity, enough to support organisms adapted to their conditions. The survival of this lineage did not depend on resisting the changes occurring around it. It depended on occupying environments where those changes unfolded at a pace that allowed continuity. The structure of the habitat, rather than the organism alone, contributed to this persistence. Through these conditions, the lineage remained present, extending through a period that removed the majority of life from both land and sea. The world that followed bore little resemblance to what had existed before, yet within it, this continuity remained intact, carried forward through environments that had sheltered it during the most extreme phases of change. Across spans of time that stretch far beyond familiar scales, there was an era when enormous bodies moved across land, air, and sea, filling ecological roles that seem almost improbable in their size and variety. From roughly 252 million years ago to 66 million years ago, the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods formed a continuous interval in which dinosaurs occupied nearly every terrestrial environment on Earth. Within that same interval, the lineage that would become modern dragonflies remained present, moving through its own cycle within the margins of this larger world. By the Jurassic period, its fundamental design had settled into a form that closely resembles what exists today. The structure of the body, the arrangement of the wings, and the systems that support its life were already established. It was not a form in transition. It had reached a point where further change offered no clear advantage. In the air above, different dynamics unfolded. Large flying reptiles, known as pterosaurs, moved through the same atmospheric space occupied by adult dragonflies. Fossil evidence reveals that these reptiles included smaller flying organisms within their diet. Dragonflies were among them, their presence recorded within preserved stomach contents, a quiet indication of interaction between vastly different scales of life. Below the surface of freshwater systems, the situation remained separate. The nymph stage existed within an environment that lay beyond the reach of these aerial and terrestrial animals. Water formed a boundary that larger predators did not cross, creating a distinct space where the dynamics of life followed different patterns. Within this space, the nymph occupied a position at the top of its local system, interacting with organisms that shared its scale and environment. This separation between environments allowed the lineage to continue without direct competition from the dominant animals of the time. While large vertebrates shaped the visible landscape, smaller systems persisted beneath, maintaining their own internal balance. Near the end of the Cretaceous period, a change occurred that altered the structure of life across the planet. Approximately 66 million years ago, a large impactor struck the region now known as the Yucatan Peninsula. The object, estimated to be between 10 and 15 kilometers in diameter, entered the atmosphere at high speed, releasing energy that spread across multiple systems simultaneously. The immediate effects included a shockwave that traveled across continents, a massive displacement of ocean water, and widespread fires ignited by material ejected into the atmosphere and returning to the surface. In the period that followed, particles suspended in the air reduced the amount of sunlight reaching the surface, leading to a sustained decrease in temperature. This reduction in light disrupted processes that depend on photosynthesis, forming the base of many food chains. As primary producers declined, the effects moved upward through the system, affecting organisms at higher levels. Larger animals, with greater energy requirements, experienced these changes more quickly. Within freshwater environments, conditions shifted as well, but not at the same rate or intensity as in larger systems. Bodies of water retained heat and buffered changes in surrounding conditions, creating spaces where life could persist under reduced light and altered temperature. In these environments, the nymph stage continued, drawing from available resources that required less energy to sustain. Small invertebrates, organic material within the water, and interactions within the system provided enough continuity to support survival through this period. When conditions stabilized, the structure of life had changed significantly. Many of the large terrestrial animals that had defined the previous era were no longer present. Within the smaller, contained systems, continuity had been maintained, allowing certain lineages to extend beyond the disruption. The dragonfly lineage remained among them, continuing its cycle within environments that had carried it through successive changes, its form aligned with conditions that persisted even as the larger world shifted around it. Change is often treated as the defining feature of life, a continuous movement toward new forms shaped by shifting conditions. Yet there are lineages where change slows to near stillness, where the visible structure remains consistent across spans of time that would normally produce transformation. The question is not whether variation occurs, but why it fails to alter the fundamental design. Within every generation, mutations arise. Small alterations in genetic material accumulate continuously, introducing differences that can, under certain conditions, become the basis for change. Evolutionary stasis does not mean these variations stop. It means that the variations do not lead to a replacement of the core structure. The form persists, not because it is fixed, but because alternatives do not surpass it in function. Natural selection operates through comparison. Designs that perform poorly are removed over time, while those that perform better are retained and spread. This process depends on differences in performance. When a structure consistently meets the demands of its environment, the range of variation that improves upon it becomes extremely narrow. Most changes reduce efficiency rather than enhance it, and are therefore filtered out. The ecological context of the dragonfly lineage contributes to this stability. Freshwater systems have existed continuously for over 400 million years, maintaining conditions that, while variable in detail, remain consistent in their fundamental characteristics. The boundaries of these environments, their chemical composition, and their basic structure have persisted across geological time. Within these systems, the available prey has also remained broadly similar. Small invertebrates and aquatic larvae occupy the same ecological roles they have held for hundreds of millions of years. The interactions between predator and prey follow patterns that do not require significant alteration for continued success. The feeding mechanism central to this lineage exemplifies this balance. The hydraulic extension of the labium operates with a level of efficiency that leaves little room for improvement. Its speed, precision, and low energy cost create a system where modifications tend to disrupt performance rather than enhance it. Variations that alter this mechanism are less effective and are gradually removed through selection, reinforcing the existing design. In contrast, other organisms have undergone significant structural change when their environments shifted. The lineage leading to the modern horse provides a clear example. Over approximately 50 million years, changes in vegetation transformed forested regions into open grasslands. This shift altered the demands placed on herbivores, favoring speed and endurance over maneuverability within dense vegetation. The horse lineage responded through changes in limb structure, body size, and feeding adaptations, moving from a small, multi-toed form to the large, single-toed animal seen today. This transformation occurred because the environment imposed new constraints that the previous form could not fully meet. Adaptation became necessary for continued survival. In the case of the dragonfly, such pressures did not arise at a level sufficient to force a redesign. The existing structure remained compatible with the environment as it persisted through time. The result is a form of stability that reflects not stagnation, but completeness. The design aligns with its context so closely that change offers no clear advantage. Evolution continues to operate, but its effects are contained within the boundaries of a structure that remains consistently effective. This perspective reframes the idea of adaptation. Rather than viewing change as the only measure of evolutionary success, it highlights the significance of forms that require no alteration to persist. Stability becomes a reflection of alignment between organism and environment, where the conditions that shape life remain within a range that the existing design can accommodate. Across millions of years, this alignment has held, allowing the lineage to continue without departing from its established form, its persistence carried by a balance that has not been disrupted by the passage of time. Stone holds time in a form that does not move. Layers settle, compress, and harden, preserving moments that would otherwise dissolve into absence. Within these layers, certain impressions remain with unusual clarity, carrying details that bridge distant ages without distortion. Among the earliest records of this lineage is Erysipelas, found within rock formations in what is now France, dated to approximately 325 million years ago. The conditions that preserved it were precise. Fine sediment settled gently over the organism, capturing the structure of its wings before decay could erase them. Over time, pressure transformed that sediment into stone, holding the pattern in place. The wings reveal more than shape. They display a network of veins arranged in a branching geometry that can be compared directly with living species. Each line, each junction, follows a pattern that remains consistent across the entire span of time separating them. The comparison does not require interpretation. It is visible in the structure itself, a continuity that extends across millions of years without alteration. In these early fossils, the fundamental architecture of the wing is already present. The arrangement of veins that supports flight today appears in the same configuration, forming a solution that has not required revision. It is not an approximation or an early version. It is the same structure, preserved in stone with enough detail to allow a direct correspondence. Another form of preservation offers a different perspective. In deposits of amber formed during the Cretaceous period, around 100 million years ago, dragonflies became trapped within hardened tree resin. The process encased them rapidly, protecting delicate surface features that would normally degrade. Within these amber specimens, the compound eyes remain intact. Under magnification, the surface reveals the geometry of individual facets, each one part of a larger visual system. The arrangement, spacing, and structure of these facets correspond closely with those of modern dragonflies. The similarity extends beyond general form into fine detail, suggesting a continuity not only in shape but in function. Fossils of the nymph stage provide further evidence. Structures associated with the labium have been identified and described in preserved specimens, showing the same hydraulic mechanism present in living individuals. The components align in both position and proportion, indicating that this system existed long before many later lineages emerged. Taken together, these records form a pattern that remains consistent across different modes of preservation. Whether in sedimentary rock or amber, the essential features of the organism appear unchanged. The evidence does not suggest gradual transformation leading toward a modern form. It shows a design already established, carried forward through successive layers of time. This continuity introduces a perspective that extends beyond individual specimens. The same structural solutions observed in ancient fossils persist in present environments, linking distant periods through a shared form. The organism has remained aligned with its ecological role across changes that reshaped much of the surrounding world. The fossil record, in this case, does not present a sequence of transitions. It presents repetition, a form appearing again and again with the same defining features. Each layer confirms the presence of a structure that has not required modification to persist. Reading this record depends on recognizing the significance of these preserved details. The patterns within stone and amber become meaningful when compared with living forms, revealing connections that might otherwise remain unnoticed. Through careful examination, these fragments of the past assemble into a continuous narrative, one that extends from the earliest preserved impressions to the organisms present today. For much of recorded history, two separate creatures seem to share the same landscapes without ever being linked. One moved through air with precision and light, the other remained hidden below the surface, compact and unfamiliar in form. They were observed independently, described in isolation, and placed into different categories, their connection unrecognized. The idea that a single organism could pass through radically different forms during its life did not emerge clearly until the 17th century. During this period, Jan Swammerdam began examining insects with a level of detail that challenged prevailing beliefs. Using early microscopes and careful dissections, he documented structures within developing insects that revealed continuity between larval and adult stages. At the time, a common view held that small animals could arise spontaneously from non-living material, appearing from mud or decaying matter without a preceding life stage. Swammerdam's work provided evidence that contradicted this idea, showing that transformation, rather than sudden appearance, defined the life cycle of insects. His observations suggested that what seemed like separate creatures were in fact stages of a single organism. Despite the clarity of his findings, acceptance was slow. His manuscripts remained unpublished for decades after his death, delaying the broader recognition of metamorphosis as a fundamental biological process. The connection between aquatic nymph and aerial adult remained unclear to many observers, even as evidence accumulated. Understanding of specific mechanisms within the nymph developed even more gradually. Early naturalists described the structure of the head and mouth parts, noting the presence of folded components, but their function was misinterpreted. The nymph was thought to rely on simple biting motions, with no awareness of the rapid extension system concealed within its form. It was not until the 20th century that this mechanism began to be understood in detail. Advances in imaging technology allowed researchers to observe movements that occurred too quickly to be seen directly. In the 1980s, high-speed photography captured the extension of the labium, revealing both its speed and its structure during action. The footage showed a motion that did not align with previous assumptions, prompting a reevaluation of how the nymph interacted with its environment. The clarity provided by these images transformed understanding. What had been inferred from static observation became visible as a dynamic process, linking anatomical structure with function in a way that could be directly observed. Even in more recent times, aspects of the dragonfly's life remained undiscovered. The long-distance movement of Pantala flavescens was only confirmed in 2016 after years of observation and analysis. Patterns noted by individuals familiar with seasonal changes were eventually supported by chemical evidence, revealing connections between distant populations that had not been recognized before. At the same time, new species continue to be identified, particularly in regions where freshwater systems have not been extensively studied. As recently as 2020, Descriptions of previously unknown forms have been added to scientific records, indicating that the diversity within this lineage is not yet fully documented. This gradual accumulation of knowledge reflects the complexity of studying organisms that occupy multiple environments and life stages. The adult form is visible and active during daylight, while the nymph remains hidden within water, its presence inferred more often than directly observed. The result is a body of understanding that continues to expand, shaped by new methods and observations. A lineage that has existed for hundreds of millions of years remains, in some respects, only partially understood, its full story emerging through careful study across generations of observation. In small bodies of water, balance does not emerge from size or dominance in the way it often appears on land. Instead, it depends on relationships that remain largely unseen, where the presence of a single organism can influence the structure of everything around it. This is the nature of a keystone predator, a species whose role within an ecosystem exceeds what its size or number would suggest. When it is present, the system holds together. When it is removed, the structure begins to shift. Within freshwater environments, the dragonfly nymph occupies this position. It exists among many other organisms, yet its influence extends through multiple layers of interaction, shaping the composition and stability of the entire system. During its development, a single nymph consumes a large number of smaller organisms. Among these are mosquito larvae, which share the same environment and depend on the same resources. Over the course of its larval life, one nymph can reduce hundreds of these larvae before they reach maturity. In environments where nymph populations are stable, this continuous predation limits the number of mosquitoes that emerge into the surrounding air. When this predation is absent, the balance shifts. Mosquito larvae increase in number, drawing more heavily from the base of the food web. They consume algae and microscopic organisms that play a critical role in maintaining water quality. As these lower levels are depleted, the effects extend upward, altering the composition of the system. Water clarity begins to change as suspended particles increase. Oxygen levels can decline as decomposition accelerates, driven by an imbalance in organic matter. The absence of a regulating predator allows these changes to compound, gradually transforming the conditions within the pond. Where nymph populations remain intact, a different pattern emerges. Predation on mid-level consumers reduces pressure on algae and aquatic plants, allowing them to persist in stable amounts. These plants contribute to oxygen production and help maintain clarity within the water. The system supports a range of invertebrate species that rely on these conditions, creating a network of interactions that reinforce one another. This interconnected structure forms a trophic cascade where changes at one level influence multiple others. The nymph, by controlling populations of certain organisms, indirectly supports the conditions that sustain its own environment. It does not act with intention, yet its presence shapes the system in a way that maintains continuity. Within its own species, additional interactions occur. Larger nymphs may prey on smaller individuals, introducing a form of regulation that prevents any single group from dominating resources. This behavior creates a distribution of sizes and developmental stages, reducing competition within the species and contributing to overall stability. Experimental studies have demonstrated the effect of removing this predator. In controlled freshwater systems where nymphs were excluded, mosquito populations increased dramatically within a single season, sometimes by several 100%. This rapid change illustrates how strongly the system depends on the presence of this single organism. The influence of the dragonfly nymph extends beyond individual interactions. It shapes the physical and chemical characteristics of its environment, contributing to clarity, oxygen balance, and the distribution of life within the water. These effects emerge gradually, the result of continuous processes rather than isolated events. Within these small ecosystems, stability is not static but maintained through ongoing interactions. The nymph occupies a central role within this process, its actions linking multiple levels of the system in a way that sustains the conditions necessary for life to persist. Across deep time, continuity has often depended on the persistence of certain environments, places where conditions remain stable enough to support life through wider changes. Freshwater systems have long served this role, holding within them the conditions required for the lineage to continue. In the present, these same environments are changing in ways that occur more quickly than many natural processes can follow. Since 1970, approximately 35% of the world's wetlands have been lost. These areas include marshes, swamps, ponds, and slow-moving streams, each one forming part of a network that supports aquatic life. Their disappearance is not the result of a single event, but of ongoing changes in land use. Drainage for agriculture, expansion of urban areas, and alterations made for flood control have reduced these habitats in ways that are often permanent. When a wetland is drained and converted, the structure it contained does not return simply by reintroducing water. The layers of interaction that once defined it, the organisms, the chemical balance, and the physical conditions, are altered or removed entirely. The absence of these elements prevents the system from re-establishing itself in its previous form. Within this context, the dragonfly nymph depends on environments that remain consistent over time. Its development requires water that persists across seasons, allowing it to complete its growth over multiple years. When these conditions are interrupted, entire groups of individuals can be lost before reaching maturity. Current assessments indicate that approximately 16% of dragonfly species are listed as threatened on the International Union for Conservation of Nature Red List. This proportion has increased with each successive evaluation, reflecting changes in habitat availability and quality across different regions. Climate patterns introduce additional factors. Temporary water bodies that once remained filled through warmer months are now drying earlier in the season. This shift reduces the time available for development, particularly for species that require extended periods before emergence. When water disappears before this process is complete, the developmental cycle is interrupted. In mountainous regions, species adapted to cold, fast-flowing streams face a different form of change. As glaciers retreat and temperatures rise, the characteristics of these streams shift. Water becomes warmer and may carry different levels of dissolved oxygen, altering conditions that were previously stable. Species with narrow tolerances for these variables experience reduced habitat availability. Specific cases illustrate these changes. The Norfolk hawker, found in certain parts of the United Kingdom, depends on clean, slow-moving water with particular chemical properties. Changes in land use, including agricultural runoff, introduce substances that alter water composition. Combined with temperature shifts, these changes affect the suitability of the habitat for this species. The presence of dragonfly nymphs has become an indicator used by freshwater ecologists to assess the condition of aquatic systems. Their diversity and abundance reflect the overall health of the environment. When these organisms are absent, it often signals that the system has undergone significant change, affecting multiple levels of interaction within it. The scale of these changes differs from earlier disruptions in one key aspect. Previous events unfolded over extended periods, allowing some environments to persist as others transformed. The current rate of change compresses these shifts into shorter intervals, reducing the time available for adjustment. Within this context, the lineage continues to exist across many regions, its presence maintained where conditions remain suitable. Its persistence reflects the continuation of environments that support it, environments that are themselves subject to ongoing transformation. Darkness settles without announcement, not as an absence, but as a shift in how the world operates. Beneath the surface, activity does not diminish. It rearranges itself into patterns that belong to this quieter phase. The pond becomes a layered system of movement and stillness, each occupying its place with precision. The nymph remains within this system without pause. Unlike many animals that enter cycles of reduced awareness, it maintains continuous sensitivity to its surroundings. Its body does not withdraw from the environment. Instead, it holds a constant readiness, a state that does not resemble rest so much as sustained attention. As light fades, the composition of life within the water changes. Organisms that remained buried during the day begin to move upward from the sediment. Small invertebrates emerge from narrow openings in the substrate, drifting or crawling into the open water. Certain fish alter their depth and behavior, tracing slower paths closer to the surface. Above, adult insects descend toward the water, some to lay eggs, others drawn by reflection or scent, becoming part of the system they briefly touch. With this shift comes a change in how information is gathered. Vision, though still present, becomes less dominant. The nymph relies increasingly on mechanoreception, the detection of minute disturbances carried through the water. Every movement produces a trace, a subtle displacement that travels outward in all directions. These traces overlap, intersect, and fade, forming a continuous field of signals that describe the activity of the pond without the need for light. The surface holds its own quiet tension. Fine ripples form where insects make contact, brief dimples that vanish almost as soon as they appear. Below, the water column becomes a space of intersecting paths, each movement leaving a signature that can be read by those equipped to perceive it. Near the bottom, the sediment loosens in places as organisms move through it, releasing faint clouds that settle again with time. Within this shifting arrangement, the nymph occupies a fixed position. It aligns itself with structures that break the uniformity of the environment, a submerged stem, a fragment of rock, the curve of a root. Its body remains still, not in inactivity but in restraint, minimizing disturbance while receiving the constant flow of information around it. The signals it detects are not isolated events, but part of a continuous pattern. A small displacement indicates motion at a distance, its direction and speed encoded in the way the wave travels. Multiple signals combine, allowing the nymph to interpret the position and movement of nearby organisms without direct sight. This process unfolds continuously, without interruption, forming a precise awareness of the immediate environment. Time, in this setting, is not marked by visible change but by the accumulation of these subtle interactions. Movements occur, fade, and are replaced by others, creating a steady rhythm that persists through the night. The nymph remains within this rhythm, neither accelerating nor slowing, its presence defined by consistency rather than action. The posture it holds has remained effective across intervals far longer than any single environment has persisted. The surrounding conditions have shifted in countless ways, yet this mode of existence continues without alteration. It is a form of engagement that depends not on constant motion, but on the ability to interpret the smallest variations in a complex field. Waiting, in this context, is not the absence of activity. It is an active state shaped by perception, a continuous process of receiving, filtering, and interpreting information. Within the stillness, the system operates with a precision that does not require visible movement to function. Along the margins where water meets air, movement gathers into brief territories that exist only for as long as they can be held. Adult dragonflies trace invisible boundaries over these narrow stretches, returning again and again to the same lines as if the space itself could be claimed through repetition. These areas are not marked by structure or scent but by presence, maintained through continuous flight and interruption. Males occupy these zones with a precision that allows no overlap. When another enters, the response is immediate. The two close distance rapidly, shifting from parallel motion into direct engagement. What follows is not random contact, but controlled interaction at speed, bodies aligning, separating, then colliding again in short sequences that resolve only when one yields and departs. The space remains, briefly empty, then filled again by the victor's return. Before any pairing can occur, a separate process takes place, one that unfolds quietly in contrast to the visible contest above the water. The male must reposition his own reproductive material, moving it from its origin near the end of the abdomen to a secondary structure closer to the thorax. This transfer is deliberate, performed while perched or in slow, controlled flight, a necessary preparation without which mating cannot proceed. When a female enters the defended space, the nature of movement shifts once more. Contact is established not through collision, but through alignment. The male secures her just behind the head using specialized appendages, forming a tandem that moves as a single unit. Together, they adjust position until the connection completes, the female curving her abdomen forward to meet the male's secondary genitalia. The result is a closed loop, a shape maintained through balance and coordination rather than force. Within this configuration, a second, less visible interaction unfolds. The structures of the male are not limited to transfer. They also possess the ability to alter what has already been placed there. Through a combination of form and motion, they can displace or remove existing sperm from previous pairings before introducing their own. This process occurs without pause, integrated into the act itself, a form of competition that leaves no external trace. The pair may remain connected in motion, drifting or circling above the same narrow stretch of water. Even after separation, the association often continues. The male follows closely as the female begins to deposit eggs, maintaining proximity that allows immediate response to any approaching rival. Other males attempt to intercept, but each approach is met with renewed defense. The earlier aerial contests repeating in shorter, more focused bursts. Females do not remain passive within this system. When persistent attention becomes excessive, some adopt a different strategy, releasing their hold on the air entirely. They descend abruptly and become still against the ground, their bodies aligned with the surface in a way that removes visible cues of movement. In this stillness, attention shifts elsewhere, and the disturbance passes. Egg deposition occurs in several forms, each suited to the conditions of the water body. Some release eggs directly into open water, allowing them to settle. Others place them within plant tissue, using the structure of stems and leaves as both anchor and protection. In certain environments, eggs are inserted into soft substrates, concealed beneath the surface. Each method leads to the same outcome, the quiet beginning of a stage that will unfold out of sight. Within days, development begins, and the cycle resumes beneath the surface, continuing along the same pathways that have persisted through intervals far beyond the lifespan of any single individual. The sequence does not require variation to continue, only the conditions that allow it to proceed. Before the narrative drifts further, the scale settles into place through count and measure, each figure a quiet anchor in a story that spans beyond immediate perception. Across the present world, approximately 3,000 species of dragonfly have been formally described, alongside nearly 3,000 species of damselfly, their closest relatives sharing much of the same evolutionary foundation. Together, they occupy every continent except Antarctica, tracing a distribution that follows freshwater wherever it persists. Within a single temperate pond of moderate size, life gathers in layers that are rarely seen all at once. Beneath the surface, nymph populations can reach into the hundreds, sometimes more, composed of multiple species and overlapping stages of development. Smaller individuals remain closer to the substrate, while larger ones occupy slightly elevated positions, each tier interacting with the others in a shifting arrangement that never fully resolves into stillness. On a broader scale, precise global counts remain beyond reach, as is often the case with insects whose lives unfold in environments that resist continuous observation. Yet, regional studies offer glimpses into density that, when extended across continents, suggest totals in the hundreds of billions. These are not concentrated in a single place, but dispersed across countless bodies of water, each pond, stream, and wetland contributing its portion to the whole. Against this vast continuity stands the brevity of the adult phase. The longest recorded lifespan for an individual adult dragonfly in the wild approaches 4 months, though most exist for a much shorter span. This contrast between the duration of the lineage and the fleeting nature of each individual creates a pattern where persistence is carried not by any one life, but by the uninterrupted succession of many. Generation follows generation, with a regularity shaped by environment and species. Taking an average interval of approximately 2 years, 300 million years of continuous reproduction results in roughly 150 million successive generations. Each of these represents a complete cycle, from egg to nymph to adult and back again, repeating without interruption across spans of time that encompass shifts in continents, climates, and the composition of life itself. Placed beside this, the scale of human existence becomes more narrowly framed. Modern humans have existed for approximately 300,000 years, representing around 15,000 generations. The comparison does not diminish one or elevate the other. It simply reveals a difference in duration, a contrast between timelines that unfold at different scales. Within each of those 150 million generations, the same fundamental pattern has occurred. A nymph has occupied a position within the water, maintaining awareness of its surroundings, responding to the movement of nearby organisms, and continuing the sequence that leads forward into the next generation. The details vary with species and location, yet the structure remains consistent, repeated across intervals too vast to be held in a single view. Numbers, in this context, do not serve as endpoints but as markers along a continuous path. They describe magnitude without fully containing it, offering a way to approach something that extends beyond direct experience. Through them, the continuity of the lineage becomes visible not as an abstract idea, but as a sequence of discrete steps, each one complete in itself, each one leading into the next without pause. Across distant branches of life, separated by lineage and time, similar patterns appear with a quiet consistency. They do not arise from shared ancestry, but from shared constraints, the same physical limits shaping different bodies toward comparable forms. In water, where movement is slowed and resistance is constant, certain solutions repeat, as if the medium itself guides their emergence. Among insects unrelated to dragonflies, mantid flies developed a mode of hunting that echoes this pattern. They remain still, positioned within their environment with minimal disturbance, waiting for motion to enter a narrow range. When it does, the response is immediate, a rapid extension driven not solely by muscle, but by stored energy released in a single controlled action. The structure differs in detail, yet the underlying principle aligns, a concealed system that converts potential into sudden motion. Far removed from insects, within crustaceans, mantis shrimp exhibit another variation of this same principle. Their appendages are shaped for impact rather than grasping, but the mechanism that powers them draws from the same source, internal pressure, built and released with precision. The strike occurs with such speed that the surrounding water cannot move aside quickly enough, forming transient effects that briefly alter the medium itself. Though the outcome differs, the pathway to that outcome follows a similar logic. In aquatic beetle larvae, yet another form appears. Their forward projecting mouthparts extend toward prey in a motion that mirrors the reach seen elsewhere, though constructed through different anatomical means. The extension is swift, the timing exact, and the target is secured before any visible response can occur. Each lineage arrives at its own version, shaped by its own history, yet guided by the same constraints of water, motion, and the need to capture without warning. These repeated patterns are not coincidences. They reflect a process in which distinct evolutionary paths converge on similar outcomes when faced with identical challenges. The physics of moving through a dense fluid, the limits of reaction time, and the need to overcome these limits without expending unnecessary energy narrow the range of viable solutions. Within this narrowed space, certain designs appear again and again. The shared features become clear when viewed together, a mechanism that stores energy before release, allowing motion faster than direct muscle contraction alone. A structure that remains concealed until the moment of action, reducing the chance of detection. A trajectory calculated to intersect with a moving target rather than simply following it. Each element contributes to a system that operates at the boundary of what the environment permits. Within this broader pattern, the dragonfly nymph represents one expression among several, yet it carries a distinct significance. Its form embodies a solution that aligns closely with these constraints, one that functions efficiently within the limits imposed by water and scale. The recurrence of similar mechanisms in unrelated organisms suggests that this configuration is not arbitrary, but arises from the structure of the problem itself. When different lineages, separated by vast spans of time and genetic distance, arrive at comparable designs, the implication is quiet but persistent. The range of effective solutions is limited, shaped by the interaction between biology and physics. Within that range, certain arrangements offer a balance of speed, efficiency, and reliability that cannot easily be surpassed. This repetition across life does not diminish the individuality of each organism. Instead, it reveals an underlying order, a set of constraints that guide form and function toward specific outcomes. In this sense, the solutions are not invented but discovered, emerging wherever conditions align with the same demands. Long before measurement and classification, before careful observation separated structure from story, the presence of dragonflies entered human awareness as something immediate and difficult to place. Across distant cultures, without contact or shared language, similar impressions formed, carried into art, symbol, and memory. The same brief flight, the same sudden appearance over water, found its way into different traditions as if guided by a common response. In ancient Egypt, images resembling dragonflies appear in tomb paintings and finely worked jewelry dating to around 3000 BCE. Their form, delicate yet precise, was incorporated into objects intended to accompany the dead, suggesting an association with passage or continuation. These depictions were not isolated ornaments but part of a broader symbolic language that sought to describe movement between states. Across the world, in Japan, the dragonfly became something more embedded in identity itself. Known as tombo, it appears in poetry, seasonal references, and family crests carried by samurai. The islands were once called Akitsushima, often translated as Island of the Dragonfly, a name that reflects not just the presence of the insect, but the impression it left on those who lived alongside it. Its flight, direct and unhesitating, came to represent qualities of focus and resilience, while its seasonal patterns tied it to cycles of change that shaped daily life. In the lands of North America, among cultures spread across plains and desert regions, the dragonfly was linked closely to water and transformation. In Navajo sand paintings, its image appears within designs associated with clarity and renewal, placed carefully within compositions that carry both meaning and function. The insect's association with water, its tendency to appear near its surface, made it a fitting presence in traditions that understood water as both necessity and symbol. Elsewhere, in medieval Europe, a different interpretation emerged. The dragonfly became known as the devil's darning needle, a name shaped by unease rather than familiarity. Its rapid, silent movement, its sudden changes in direction, and the reflective quality of its body created an impression that was difficult to reconcile with the more familiar patterns of other insects. Stories grew around this uncertainty, placing the dragonfly within a framework of caution and superstition. Despite these differences, each culture responded to the same visible form, the adult moving through air, appearing and disappearing with a speed that resisted easy observation. The years spent beneath the surface remained entirely outside this shared awareness. What people encountered was only the final phase, the brief interval in which the insect entered open space and light. The deeper portion of its life remained unrecorded, not through lack of interest but through inaccessibility. The nymph, existing below the surface, did not enter the field of vision in the same way. Its form, its behavior, and its role within the water went unnoticed, leaving the visible stage to define the entirety of the creature in human thought. When naturalists began to examine these hidden stages, the understanding shifted quietly. In the 19th century, detailed observations and illustrations revealed structures and behaviors that had no place in earlier descriptions. The work of observers such as Philip Henry Gossi brought attention to features that had remained unseen, offering a view into a life that unfolded almost entirely out of sight. Even with this knowledge, the broader perception remained focused on the fleeting aerial form. The connection between stages, though established scientifically, did not fully replace the earlier impressions that had accumulated over centuries. The visible continued to shape understanding more strongly than the concealed. Across time and place, the same pattern repeats. A brief appearance gives rise to lasting meaning, while the longer, hidden existence continues without recognition, shaping the conditions that allow that appearance to occur. There is a number that holds steady beneath everything that has come before, quiet and exact. The lineage has persisted for 300 million years, not as a single continuous life, but as a sequence of endings that never quite reached a final one. Each individual existed briefly, then was replaced, and the continuity lies not in any one body but in the uninterrupted passage between them. No single dragonfly has endured beyond a narrow span. The nymph lives for a few years at most, shaped by water, then the adult emerges into air for a matter of weeks or months. Within that limited interval, the necessary acts occur, and the cycle closes. Nothing in this process carries awareness of what came before or what will follow. Each life is complete in itself, bounded by its own beginning and end. To extend this pattern across deep time requires a different way of understanding survival. It is not a story of endurance in the sense of persistence within a single form. It is a chain of transitions, each one dependent on the previous and leading into the next. For 300 million years, this chain has remained unbroken. Across approximately 150 million generations, at least some individuals in each cycle have reached the point of reproduction, continuing the sequence without interruption. There is no central direction guiding this continuity. No intention accumulates across generations. Each nymph feeds, grows, and reaches a threshold where transformation becomes possible. Each adult moves through its brief aerial phase, encounters others, and contributes to the next set of beginnings. The pattern emerges not from planning but from repetition, each cycle sufficient to produce another. Within this repetition lies a broader context. The majority of species that have existed on Earth are no longer present. Their forms, once stable within their own conditions, encountered changes that exceeded their range of tolerance. When those conditions shifted beyond what their structures could accommodate, the chain of continuation ended. Absence replaced presence, and the sequence did not extend further. The dragonfly lineage occupies a different position within this pattern. Its structure does not depend on a narrow set of circumstances. Instead, it functions across a range of conditions that has proven wide enough to include the variations that have occurred. Freshwater environments, though altered over time, have remained available in some form throughout these intervals, providing a consistent setting in which the cycle can continue. This distinction does not arise from refinement toward an ideal. It reflects a form that operates effectively without requiring exact conditions. The mechanisms that define its life, feeding, development, transformation, and reproduction, do not depend on precise environmental constants. They remain functional across fluctuations that would disrupt more specialized systems. In this sense, survival across deep time is not the result of reaching a peak of performance. It is the result of remaining within a range where performance continues to be possible. Each generation does not need to exceed the previous one. It needs only to meet the threshold required to produce the next. The continuity becomes a sequence of adequacy, each step sufficient, none required to be exceptional. Over vast intervals, this sufficiency accumulates into persistence. The chain holds not because any single link is unbreakable, but because the conditions required to break it entirely have not aligned. Seen from this perspective, survival is not a singular achievement, but an ongoing process, composed of countless ordinary events. Each individual life contributes without awareness, and the pattern extends beyond any one moment, carried forward through repetition that does not require memory to continue. Across the surface of the planet, a thin network of water lies scattered in fragments, small enough to be overlooked, persistent enough to hold entire systems within it. These places occupy less than 1% of the Earth's surface, yet within that narrow margin lives nearly 10% of all known species. The density is not immediately visible. It does not announce itself in scale or spectacle, but in the quiet layering of lives that continue without drawing attention. Within these freshwater spaces, interactions unfold at a level that rarely enters human awareness. The movements are small, often concealed, taking place beneath reflective surfaces that suggest stillness rather than activity. What appears simple from above contains a complexity shaped by countless relationships, each one connected to the next in a structure that remains stable only through constant motion. Scientific attention has not kept pace with this density. Compared to oceans and forests, freshwater systems receive less sustained observation, fewer resources, and less cultural focus. Their boundaries are often narrow, their presence fragmented across landscapes shaped for other purposes. Yet within these limits, the biological processes remain continuous, operating with a consistency that does not depend on recognition. The dragonfly nymph exists within this context as one expression of a broader pattern. It is not isolated or exceptional in its environment, but part of a network in which many species perform roles that support the stability of the whole. Its presence reflects conditions that allow such systems to persist: water that remains long enough, chemical balances that hold within viable ranges, and a sequence of interactions that continue without interruption. These conditions occur in places that intersect with daily life. In temperate regions across multiple continents, small water bodies are distributed within reach of ordinary movement. A shallow basin collecting rain, a narrow channel guiding runoff, a quiet edge of a maintained landscape, each can support the same processes that have operated for millions of years. The scale does not diminish the function. A small volume of water can sustain a complete set of relationships, provided it remains stable for a sufficient period. Within these settings, the nymph continues its pattern without distinction between remote and familiar environments. It occupies spaces that exist alongside roads, buildings, and cultivated ground, maintaining the same behaviors that have defined its lineage across vast intervals. Its presence is not restricted to distant or undisturbed places. It exists wherever conditions align, regardless of proximity to human activity. This continuity extends across regions that differ in climate and geography. The forms vary, species adapted to local conditions, yet the underlying processes remain consistent. In each case, a freshwater system supports a layered structure of interactions, and within that structure, the same fundamental roles are carried out repeatedly. What emerges from this perspective is a world that does not require distance to be encountered. It is present within ordinary surroundings, operating continuously without alteration in response to observation. The complexity remains intact, whether it is seen or not, sustained by conditions that persist independently of attention. The sense of absence arises not from a lack of activity, but from a shift in focus. When attention moves away from these systems, their processes continue without interruption, becoming effectively invisible despite their proximity. The water remains, the interactions persist, and the structures hold, even as they pass unnoticed. To return attention to these places is to recognize a continuity that has been present throughout the narrative, extending beyond individual examples into a broader pattern. The same processes that have carried a lineage across deep time are still active within these small, persistent environments, linking the present moment to intervals that extend far beyond immediate perception. Time, in this small, submerged life, does not gather into a single direction. It does not lean forward or stretch backward. It settles instead into a continuous present, held in place by water, by sediment, by the slow rhythm of change that never announces itself as progression. The nymph exists within that stillness, not as something on its way elsewhere, but as something fully contained within each moment it occupies. Across the span of its development, most of its existence unfolds in a form that passes unnoticed above the surface. This proportion, nearly all of its life, is not hidden in any deliberate sense. It simply persists beyond the boundaries of attention, shaped by conditions that do not require observation to remain real. Within that space, movement is measured in subtle adjustments, in the careful positioning of a body that does not waste energy, in the quiet readiness that defines its way of being. There is no indication within this state that anything is incomplete. The nymph does not hold a future in reserve, nor does it divide its existence into stages that carry unequal weight. Each interval, whether it is marked by cold seasons, by brief encounters with prey, or by the gradual shedding of its outer form, exists with the same completeness as any other. The process of molting does not signal a step towards something greater, but a continuation of what already is, a quiet renewal that alters scale without altering purpose. In this sense, duration does not accumulate as anticipation. It accumulates as presence. The long periods beneath the surface are not stretches of absence waiting to be filled, but sustained states of activity and awareness, even when outward motion is minimal. The environment provides everything required, and the nymph responds to it without abstraction, without the need to imagine what lies beyond its immediate conditions. When the final transformation arrives, it does not rewrite what came before. The adult form emerges as a continuation, not as a departure. There is no separation between what has been and what becomes. The years beneath the surface do not stand behind the adult as something left behind, but exist within it, carried forward without distinction. The new form does not interpret its past, it embodies it. This continuity extends across generations, each one shaped by the same sequence of conditions, each one complete within its own span. The passage of time, when seen at this scale, is not a line that leads toward an endpoint, but a pattern that repeats without diminishing its meaning. Each life is brief, yet sufficient. Each moment is small, yet entire. What emerges from this pattern is not a lesson in duration, but in the nature of presence itself. The nymph does not divide its life into preparation and outcome. It does not defer its existence to a future state. It occupies each phase fully, without reduction, without postponement. The long intervals beneath the surface, the brief emergence into air, the continuation of the cycle through reproduction, all hold equal weight within the structure of its existence. Across vast spans of time, this way of being has remained unchanged, not because it resists change, but because it requires nothing beyond what it already is. The continuity does not depend on awareness or intention. It is sustained by the simple fact that each stage is complete in itself, requiring no justification beyond its presence. Within this, time loses its usual shape. It no longer stretches between beginnings and endings, but settles into a series of moments that do not need to lead anywhere to be sufficient. Before familiar coastlines took shape, before the ocean basins arranged themselves into the maps now carried in memory, this lineage had already entered the world. The surface of the planet was configured differently, land gathered into forms that no longer exist, skies framed by constellations positioned elsewhere along their slow galactic path. In that distant arrangement, long before names or boundaries, the same quiet pattern had begun. Across the movement of continents, the ground itself, shifting over, spans too gradual to witness. Freshwater systems formed and reformed, appearing where conditions allowed, vanishing where they did not. Within those shifting boundaries, the lineage persisted, not anchored to a single place, but to a type of environment that returned again and again. The continuity did not depend on stability of location, but on the recurrence of suitable conditions across a changing world. Time unfolded through intervals marked by disruption, events that reshaped the surface and atmosphere, altering the structure of life in ways that removed entire branches at once. Through each of these intervals, the lineage continued, not unchanged in every detail, but consistent in its essential form. The sequence of generations remained unbroken, each one sufficient to carry the pattern forward into the next. As eras passed, new forms appeared, others receded, and the composition of life shifted in ways that, from a human perspective, define entirely separate worlds. Large terrestrial creatures emerged and disappeared, ecosystems reorganized, climates shifted between extremes. Within all of this, the same small presence persisted wherever water allowed, repeating its cycle without interruption. The passage from ancient history into recorded time occupies only a narrow portion of this duration. Civilizations rose and fell within intervals that, when placed against this scale, compress into brief moments. The span between events, often considered distant from one another, becomes small when set against the continuity of this lineage. Generations of human experience accumulate within a fraction of a larger sequence that extends far beyond direct comprehension. Within each of those human intervals, the same pattern continued in parallel, largely unnoticed. In freshwater systems across the planet, the nymph remained present, its behavior unchanged in principle, responding to its environment in the same manner it had for millions of years. The repetition did not require variation to remain effective. It persisted through adequacy, through the capacity to function within a range of conditions broad enough to encompass continual change. This persistence is not defined by awareness or intention. It is the result of an unbroken succession, each generation meeting the conditions necessary to produce the next. There is no accumulation of memory across that sequence, no recognition of duration, only the continuation of a pattern that has not failed. The scale emerges only when viewed from outside, when the individual moments are gathered into a single arc. Within that arc, the present becomes one point among many, connected to distant beginnings by a continuous chain that has never fully broken. The environments have shifted, the surrounding life has changed, yet the underlying structure of this lineage has remained sufficient within each new arrangement. It has not required reinvention to persist, only the continuation of what has already proven adequate. What remains at this scale is not a single event or transformation, but the fact of continuity itself. A pattern established in a distant configuration of the world has extended through every subsequent change, carried forward without interruption into the present moment, where it continues in the same quiet manner. Within water, within darkness, within conditions that have always been enough, it is possible for something to be both fully present and almost entirely unrecognized, existing within reach of ordinary experience while remaining outside the boundaries of notice. The dragonfly lineage rests in that condition, widespread across the planet, embedded in environments that intersect with daily life, yet largely absent from the awareness of those who pass nearby. Its success is measurable in persistence, in continuity, in the unbroken extension of generations across deep time, and still, it remains peripheral to the attention of a species that has devoted itself to understanding the world. Human effort has extended outward with remarkable precision, mapping distant structures, decoding the smallest units of biological information, building instruments capable of reaching beyond immediate surroundings. These achievements represent a direction of focus, a decision about where to place curiosity. Within that same span, the presence of this lineage has remained constant, not concealed by distance, but by familiarity. It does not require specialized equipment to observe, only a shift in where attention rests. This is not an absence of knowledge. Scientific work has described the anatomy, behavior, and ecological role of the dragonfly in detail, assembling a record that extends from ancient rock layers to present observation. The information exists, structured and accessible, yet it does not translate into widespread awareness. The gap lies not in discovery, but in the distribution of attention, in the difference between what is known and what is commonly perceived. The hiddenness of the nymph begins as a physical condition. It occupies a space beneath the surface, its form blending with surroundings, its movement restrained, its presence quiet. These qualities reduce visibility in a literal sense, placing it outside casual observation. Yet beyond this, another layer of hiddenness emerges, one that does not depend on concealment, but on scale. The history it carries extends beyond ordinary frameworks of time, linking present existence to intervals that are difficult to hold in a single thought. Deep time does not announce itself. It resides within materials, within landscapes, within living forms that have persisted across vast durations. It is present in every environment that has endured, in every system that has continued without interruption. The difficulty lies not in its absence, but in the limits of perception, in the tendency to experience the immediate without registering the continuity that supports it. Within this context, the dragonfly nymph becomes a point of convergence between accessibility and scale. Its presence can be encountered directly within environments that require no special conditions to reach, and at the same time, it carries a continuity that extends far beyond immediate experience. The connection between those two aspects exists whether it is recognized or not, held within the organism itself as a result of its unbroken lineage. The weight of this hiddenness is not defined by mystery, but by proximity. It exists close enough to be observed, grounded in environments that are part of everyday surroundings, and yet it remains outside common awareness. The distance is not physical, but attentional, shaped by what is chosen to be seen and what is allowed to remain in the background. To recognize this presence is to encounter a different scale of context, one in which the ordinary becomes connected to durations that exceed familiar measures. The nymph does not change in response to being observed. It continues its pattern, indifferent to recognition, sustained by the same conditions that have supported it across its entire history. Within that continuity, the distinction between visible and invisible shifts. What was previously overlooked remains in place, unchanged, while perception adjusts to include it. The environment does not transform, but its meaning expands, revealing a depth that had always been present, waiting not to be discovered, but to be noticed. Somewhere within reach of ordinary movement, in water that reflects nothing unusual from above, a small body holds itself still against the structure of its surroundings. The surface may appear quiet, carrying only the faint suggestion of what lies beneath. Yet within that space, awareness remains constant. The nymph exists there now, not as a symbol or a remnant, but as a living presence, engaged in the same patterns that have continued without interruption across immense spans of time. This continuity does not depend on recognition. It persists through conditions that repeat with quiet regularity: the availability of water, the presence of prey, the gradual cycling of temperature and light. These elements are sufficient, and have been sufficient, through intervals that have reshaped nearly every other aspect of the world. The lineage has not required alignment with human systems or awareness. It has continued within its own frame, unaffected by whether it is noticed or understood. Within that frame, time moves differently. It is measured not in years or eras, but in immediate conditions, in shifts that occur within the environment itself. The nymph responds to what is present, to the subtle changes in pressure, in light, in the movements of other bodies within the same space. There is no extension beyond that context, no reference to a broader scale. Its existence is defined entirely by the conditions it encounters. Human activity unfolds alongside this presence, often without intersection. Roads pass near water, structures rise and fall, systems expand and contract, all within a time frame that feels expansive from a human perspective. Yet alongside this, the nymph remains, continuing its cycle in environments that exist within the margins of these changes. The two patterns coexist, sharing space without sharing awareness. The persistence of this lineage suggests a form of independence that does not oppose human presence, but does not rely on it either. It occupies a niche defined by environmental stability rather than by interaction with other systems. When conditions remain within viable ranges, the pattern continues. When they shift beyond those ranges, the pattern adjusts or relocates, not through intention, but through the simple continuation of processes that have always operated in this way. This coexistence creates a contrast in scale. Human systems tend to concentrate attention on what changes rapidly, on events that alter conditions within short intervals. The nymph's existence unfolds across a different measure, one that absorbs change without disruption, provided that the fundamental requirements remain intact. The difference is not in complexity, but in the frame through which time is experienced. Within this shared space, encounters remain rare, not because of distance, but because of orientation. Attention moves across surfaces, across visible structures, often passing over what lies beneath without registering it. The presence remains, continuous and unaffected, operating within a layer that does not demand notice to persist. In this way, two modes of existence occupy the same environment without converging. One moves through constructed pathways, shaped by intention and awareness. The other continues through inherited patterns, shaped by conditions that have remained viable across deep time. They do not oppose each other, nor do they align. They simply exist together, each following its own continuity. What remains is not a point of contact, but a recognition of parallel presence. The nymph continues in the water, responding to its immediate world, while human life unfolds above, often without awareness of what lies below. The planet holds both, accommodating different scales of time and perception within the same limited space, allowing each to persist without requiring the other to change. There is a quality present in this small aquatic life that resembles patience, though it does not arise from intention or awareness. It exists instead as a condition, an unforced alignment between organism and environment, where no part of the process moves faster than it needs to. The nymph remains within that alignment, not delaying or advancing, but existing at the pace set by the water that surrounds it. This form of patience does not contain expectation. It does not hold an image of what comes next, or measure the distance to any future state. The passage of colder seasons does not register as something to be endured, and the return of warmth does not arrive as a long-awaited change. Each condition is met as it appears, without comparison to what came before or what may follow. The environment shifts, and the nymph shifts with it, without resistance or anticipation. Within this continuity, time does not accumulate as duration. It unfolds as a sequence of immediate states, each one complete in itself. The nymph responds to movement, to subtle changes in pressure, to the presence of other organisms within reach. Beyond these signals, there is no extension. The experience remains contained within the present conditions, repeating without variation in structure, yet never redundant in function. Across countless repetitions of this pattern, something larger persists, not through awareness, not through effort, but through the simple continuation of adequacy. Each generation completes its cycle within the same framework, producing the next without interruption. The sequence extends backward beyond familiar reference points, connecting present existence to intervals that can only be approached through indirect understanding. This continuity suggests a form of endurance that does not rely on adaptation in the way it is often imagined. It is not driven by a need to improve or transform, but by the ability to remain sufficient within a range of conditions that has proven stable over vast spans. The environment provides variation, yet not beyond the limits that this design can accommodate. As long as those limits are not exceeded, the pattern continues. In human systems of thought, similar ideas appear in different forms, often expressed through language that emphasizes presence, alignment, or completeness within the current moment. These ideas arise from observation and reflection, from attempts to describe a way of being that does not depend on reaching beyond itself. The nymph embodies such a condition without abstraction, existing within it as a direct consequence of its structure and environment. There is no distinction within this life between what is necessary and what is sufficient. The same actions fulfill both roles: feeding, growing, responding to the immediate surroundings. Each contributes to the continuation of the lineage without requiring anything beyond the established pattern. The absence of excess becomes a form of stability, reducing the need for change. Over immense spans, this stability has allowed the lineage to persist through conditions that have altered or removed many other forms of life. Not because it resists change, but because it operates within a range that has remained viable across those changes. The patience observed here is not passive, but inherent in the design itself, a reflection of how closely it aligns with the environment it inhabits. Within an ordinary body of water, this alignment continues without interruption. The surface may appear unchanged, the surroundings familiar, yet beneath it, the same pattern unfolds, as it has for intervals far beyond immediate perception. The stillness holds movement, the quiet holds continuity, and within that space, the patient rhythm of deep time remains present, sustained without effort, extending forward as it always has. At first, the presence of this animal could be reduced to a set of measured observations, a predator with extraordinary precision, existing close to ordinary human paths, shaped by a lineage extending far beyond familiar timelines. Those details stood on their own, contained within the boundaries of biology and observation. Over time, they have unfolded into something wider, revealing connections that reach beyond the creature itself and into the structure of the world it inhabits. What seemed at first like an isolated fact now rests within a larger continuity. The water that holds this life is not recent, not incidental, but part of a system that has existed in various forms across immense spans. Its boundaries shift, its contents change, yet the underlying pattern remains. Within that pattern, the same interactions continue, sustained by conditions that have proven stable enough to carry them forward. A pond encountered in passing is easy to overlook, its surface offering little indication of the processes beneath. Yet within it, a complete system operates, structured by relationships that have been maintained across intervals that extend far beyond direct experience. The presence of the nymph within that system is not an exception, but a continuation, an expression of a pattern that has remained viable through repeated change. The organism itself does not hold any awareness of this continuity. It does not perceive the scale of its lineage or the events that have unfolded alongside it. Its existence is confined to immediate conditions, to the movements and signals within its environment. It does not carry a sense of history, nor does it anticipate what follows. It responds, it grows, it transforms, each stage complete within its own frame. When it leaves the water, the transition does not mark a departure from what came before, but a continuation in a different form. The sequence remains intact, carried forward through reproduction, returning again to the same environment that supported its earlier stages. The cycle does not require variation to persist. It continues because it remains sufficient. This repetition has occurred across intervals that contain entire chapters of planetary history. While environments shifted and other forms of life appeared and disappeared, this sequence continued within the spaces that allowed it. Each completion of the cycle extends the lineage, not through intention, but through the simple fulfillment of conditions that have remained adequate. The water that supports this process does not announce its significance. It reflects the surface, carries the appearance of stillness, and holds within it a continuity that does not require recognition. Its presence is quiet, its function ongoing, its history embedded in every interaction that takes place within it. To encounter such a place is to stand at the edge of a system that extends beyond immediate perception. The surface reveals little, yet beneath it, the same processes unfold as they have for spans that exceed ordinary comprehension. The presence of the nymph is one expression of that continuity, a single point within a larger pattern that persists without interruption. Night settles over these environments without altering their function. The absence of light does not pause the processes within the water. They continue, guided by conditions that do not depend on visibility. The system remains active, sustained by interactions that require no observation to proceed. Within that stillness, the pattern holds. The lineage continues, carried forward through each generation, each cycle complete in itself, extending a continuity that remains present, quiet, and enduring within the water that has always been there.